Hi, my name is Esteban, and I'm going to tell you about some work that we did with Alok, Yamping, and Kwok at Google Brain on image classifier architecture search. Now, this is a field that has grown significantly in the last couple of years or so, and with that, it acquired a lot of complexity in the methods. We're going to show that you can actually get similar or better results with a very simple method. Also, we will then take our best model and enlarge it, and this way produce the state-of-the-art image classifier today as a benchmark on ImageNet, which is the most popular dataset for this purpose. Now, this means that we will produce a classifier that is the most accurate even when compared with other hand designs or those produced by other architecture search methods. To do architecture search, the first thing you need is a search space. This is a large set of models where you suspect there is a good image classifier. Yeah? Now, this is a very large set, trillions or more models, so you cannot evaluate all the models, train and evaluate all the models. Instead, you use an algorithm, like evolution in our case, to navigate it and find a good model. In our case, we used the NASNet search space. This was introduced in a paper by Zoff et al. In 2018. And so let me now describe what that space looks like. Every architecture in that space has the same outer skeleton, and it looks like this. And the input comes in at the bottom, the class comes out at the top, i.e. the object comes out at the top, and in between there is a stack of inception-like modules that we call cells. Yeah? And there are two types, but for the purposes of this talk, we're going to assume that there's just one type. Yeah? Now, remember, all of these cells have the same architecture, but they may have different weights because of the training. So we have to discover the architecture of a cell. For example, an architecture might look like this. And from this graph I'm showing here, it would be pretty hard to parse and see what the structure is. But for now, just note that there are two inputs and one output. And the goal of architecture search is to find out what's in between them. Now, in order to understand the architecture of a cell a little better, let me reconstruct this same example part by part. So we start out with two inputs that provide two hidden states to act upon. Yeah? And so, for example, we could apply to one of the inputs an operation, like an average pool. And then to the other input, another operation, like an identity. And then we sum the two inputs, and we call this basic unit of applying two operations to two hidden states and summing them a combination. Yeah? A combination itself produces a new hidden state that then can be used to keep constructing the structure of the cell. So here, for example, is another combination. Yeah? And so we keep doing this. Here's another, and here's another. And when we have reached 5 of them, like here, we take all the hidden states that are unused and concatenate them to produce the final output of the cell like this. So that was the search space. Now let's talk about the search algorithm. In our case, the algorithm we're going to use is an evolutionary one. Yeah? So let me describe it. Remember throughout this description that the goal is simplicity. So the algorithm starts with a population of models. Each of these models, maybe 100 or 1,000 of them, has an architecture, and each architecture is chosen at random, meaning in that diagram that we were just talking about, all the operations are chosen randomly from the list of allowed operations, and the arrows are hooked up in random ways with the constraint that they cannot form loops so as to preserve the feed-forward structure of the COMNET. All right, once we have this set of initial architectures, they're all trained and evaluated on the data set, so we have an accuracy for each of them, and that's our initial population. Now, after this, the algorithm proceeds in cycles. At each cycle, a worker picks a small subset of the population, like for example 2 in this example, and takes the best of the architecture or the best of the models in this subset and calls it the parent. Now, this step is critical because it's the only time in which the algorithm does something that is not random. This is what allows the population to get better and better as the algorithm progresses. Once the parent is selected, we copy it and mutate its architecture to produce a new architecture that then we train and evaluate on the dataset to create a new model that we call the child. This child is now put into the population. Now, I haven't told you what this mutation is. It's a rule that gives you the architecture of the child from that of the parent. I'll tell you more about it soon. Up to this point, we have been using a fairly standard evolutionary algorithm called tournament selection. But now we're going to deviate from that. Notice that the addition of the child to the population increases the population size by 1. And if we want to keep the population size constant, we have to remove one individual or kill one individual. This is a standard thing to do as well. But we're going to do it in an unusual way. We're going to kill the oldest individual in the population. By oldest, we mean the one that has been in the population for the longest time. So to do this, we just keep track of when they were added to the population. In line with our spirit of simplicity, notice that this is a very natural thing to do. Literally natural, because it's what nature does. If you have a population of frogs, for example, the oldest frogs will tend to die before the younger ones. And the selection part is natural too. The frogs that sing better will tend to have more little frogs, more offspring. We call this algorithm aging evolution. It also has some regularizing properties, so we sometimes refer to it as regularized evolution too. At the same time, other workers are doing the same thing. This algorithm is highly parallelizable. Now, the one thing that remains to describe is the mutations, i.e., how is the architecture of the child constructed from that of the parent. Now, if you take this example to be the architecture of the parent, we have two possible mutations. So a mutation is a small local transformation that is applied, and it's a random one. So one of the possibilities is that you replace one of the ops with another. So you pick a random box in this diagram and you replace what's the operation in it with one chosen at random from the list of allowed operations. Another possibility is to replace a hidden state. So take one of these arrows and move its origin to another hidden state so that it doesn't produce, under the constraint that it doesn't produce a loop, but also at random. Yeah? So each time we produce a child from a parent, we do one of these two or an identity, and that's it. That's the whole algorithm. Notice that everything we've done, with the exception of the selection of the parent, everything we've done has been random. Yeah? This is a sense in which evolution is simple. It's random search plus. Yeah? Plus there's a little bit of selection. Another sense in which evolution is simple is that it doesn't have that many metaparameters. We have mentioned only two, and in the paper we only use these two, which are the population size and the sample size. The sample size for selecting the parent, which in the examples I gave you was 2. In the paper, we compare aging evolution against the more standard tournament selection across various settings of these metaparameters and across variants of the search space and the dataset to show that aging evolution generally does better. We also give evidence that indicates this is because aging evolution is better able to navigate the noise. But now let's compare against our main baseline, the reinforcement learning approach of ZOF 2018, for which this search space was originally designed. We performed 5 reinforcement learning experiments reproducing the setup in the original paper, and 5 evolution experiments under the same conditions, and also 5 random search experiments for good measure. This plot shows you the result of these 15 experiments. Each point corresponds to the best models from one experiment. The horizontal axis shows you the model cost, so lower is better, and the vertical axis shows you test accuracy, so higher is better. Note that none of the algorithms ever saw the testing dataset. The testing dataset was only used to produce this plot. And what you can see is that evolution occupies the ideal relative position here of cheaper and more accurate models. In the paper, we also observe the pattern that evolution tends to search faster, especially at the beginning of the experiment. This may be useful in a resource-constrained scenario. We also tried these experiments at a smaller compute scale in 5 different variants of the dataset and the search space, and each time we obtained the same results. That is, that evolution tends to search faster, especially at the beginning, and at the end it gets either equal or better accuracy. Now I want to tell you about the best models that came out of our evolution experiments. We call these models amoeba nets. And in particular, the one that had the highest validation accuracy across all of these 5 experiments, we call it AmoebaNet A. This table contains a selection of the most accurate image classifiers today. The top section corresponds to hand designs, so models designed by human experts. And the bottom section consists of the results of various forms of architecture search. These 2 lines compare the best model in the baseline study and the best model in our study. You can see that when we roughly match the model size, we get very similar accuracies at the end. The line in between is a 3rd study that also got similar results in the same regime, though they used a slightly different search space. The point I'm trying to make here is that in a fair comparison against the best architecture search results in the literature, we get the same accuracy with a much simpler method. Finally, the last line shows you what happened when we took AmoebaNet A and made it as big as we could. And the result is that we got the most accurate classifier on ImageNet today. This slide shows you the architecture of AmoebaNet A, as well as a couple of links that you can follow to find a train checkpoint or to get some code to train it yourself. So, in summary, what we have done is we used a fairly natural and simple evolutionary algorithm to do architecture search for image classifiers. And doing this, we found that we could match the results of more complex methods. Moreover, when we took our best image classifier and enlarged it as much as possible, we got the state-of-the-art image classifier today according to the ImageNet benchmark, which is the accepted method for comparing these classifiers. Thank you.